There is a piece of land in the Pacific Ocean that is 36,000 square kilometers, roughly the size of Maryland. It has no nuclear weapons. It has no seat at the United Nations. Most governments on Earth pretend it doesn't exist. And yet, serious military planners in Washington, Beijing, and Tokyo have concluded that a war over this island could kill millions of people, could trigger the worst global economic collapse since the Great Depression, could, in the worst case, go nuclear for a piece of land the size of Maryland. So today, we're going to answer the only question that matters. Is Taiwan actually worth it? Worth the risk, worth the cost, worth, potentially, World War III. I'm not going to give you my answer today. I'm going to give you everything you need to form your own. Welcome to Context Missing. This one is going to be uncomfortable. Let's go. Before we talk about war, we need to understand what exactly is at stake, and it starts with a rock called silicon. Silicon is the base material for semiconductor chips, the tiny components that make every piece of modern electronics work. Your phone, your laptop, your car's braking system, hospital ventilators, missile guidance systems, stock trading algorithms, all of it runs on chips. Modern civilization is, at its most fundamental level, a chip-dependent civilization. Remove the chips and the civilization stops. Now here's the part that should make you put down whatever you're eating. 90% of the world's most advanced chips are made in one place. Not America, not Europe, not Japan, Taiwan. Specifically, one company in Taiwan, TSMC. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company produces chips so advanced that no other company on Earth, not Intel, not Samsung, can match them at scale. The 3-nanometer chips rolling off TSMC's production lines in Hsinchu are engineering achievements that push against the physical limits of matter itself. And they exist almost entirely on a 36,000 square kilometer island that China officially considers a rogue province. That is the first reason Taiwan matters, and by itself, it would already be enough. But there's a second reason, one that military strategists consider even more important than the chips: geography. Look at a map of the Western Pacific. China sits on the Asian mainland, a giant, powerful nation hemmed in by island chains. Those island chains, running from Japan through Taiwan through the Philippines, act as a natural barrier between China and the open Pacific Ocean. Military planners call this the first island chain, and Taiwan sits at its geographic center, like a cork in a bottle. Right now, that cork belongs to a democratic government that cooperates with the United States, and it is driving Beijing absolutely insane. China's navy, the largest in the world by number of ships, is effectively trapped. To reach the open Pacific, it must pass through waters near Taiwan, Japan, or the Philippines. Waters where U.S. and allied forces can monitor, intercept, and if necessary, destroy Chinese naval assets. If China controls Taiwan, that cork is gone. Chinese submarines can slip into the Pacific undetected. Chinese carriers can project power to Guam, Hawaii, and beyond. Taiwan isn't just an island, it's a strategic choke point that determines who controls the most important ocean on Earth. That is the second reason Taiwan matters. And combined with the chips, you start to understand why rational people are talking about World War III. Now let's talk about the third reason, one that gets less attention but may ultimately be the most consequential: what Taiwan represents. Taiwan is a democracy, a genuine, functional, competitive democracy, with free elections, a free press, genuine opposition parties, and civilian control of the military. It was not always this way. Taiwan was a one-party authoritarian state under the Kuomintang until the late 1980s. It democratized peacefully, without revolution, without foreign invasion, without collapse, one of the rare success stories in democratic transition. And it did so while being ethnically, linguistically, and culturally Chinese, which directly contradicts Beijing's central ideological claim. Beijing says that Chinese culture and Chinese civilization are inherently incompatible with Western-style democracy, that the Chinese people don't want it, don't need it, wouldn't choose it. Taiwan's existence, 23 million Chinese people freely choosing democracy and making it work is a living, breathing refutation of that claim. Every day Taiwan exists as a free society, it undermines a core justification for the Chinese Communist Party's monopoly on power. That's not just geopolitics, that's existential. For Xi Jinping's legitimacy, a free Taiwan is an ideological threat that never sleeps. That is the third reason Taiwan matters: chips, geography, and the idea of freedom itself. Okay, three enormous reasons. Now let's flip the question. What would actually happen if China moved on Taiwan? Not the sanitized version, not the war game version, the real version. Walk through it with me. Phase 1, the blockade. China's most likely first move is not invasion, it's strangulation. Chinese naval and air forces encircle Taiwan. No ships in, no planes out, no undersea cables cut, yet. Just a wall of military force saying, surrender or starve. Taiwan has roughly 90 days of energy reserves. It imports most of its food. A blockade, sustained long enough, could end resistance without a single soldier crossing the strait. But a blockade is also an act of war. It forces the United States, under the Taiwan Relations Act, to decide, in real time, whether to respond. That decision, made in the Situation Room, probably at 3 a.m., by exhausted people with incomplete information, could determine whether we have a regional conflict or a world war. That single decision point is why Taiwan keeps every serious national security professional awake at night. Phase 2. Assume the blockade doesn't work. Assume Taiwan holds. Assume the U.S. sends carrier groups to break it. Now we have Phase 2. Amphibious invasion. The most complex military operation in human history, attempted across 180 kilometers of some of the world's most treacherous water. The Taiwan Strait has unpredictable currents, frequent storms, and water deep enough to swallow entire assault fleets. China would need to land hundreds of thousands of troops on beaches that Taiwan has spent decades fortifying specifically to repel this scenario. Military analysts at RAND, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and the U.S. Naval War College have all run the numbers. Their consensus: China could probably take Taiwan eventually, but the losses would be catastrophic, potentially tens of thousands of Chinese soldiers dead in the first weeks alone. And that's before U.S. intervention. Once American carrier strike groups enter the fight, the calculus changes entirely. The most recent U.S. war game simulations, including one run by the House Select Committee on China in 2023, showed the U.S. and Taiwan repelling a Chinese invasion, but at devastating cost. Multiple U.S. carriers sunk, thousands of American military personnel dead, massive losses of aircraft and ships on all sides. And that's a simulation. Reality is always worse than the simulation. Phase 3, the economic apocalypse. Because even if the shooting stops quickly, the economic damage would not. Taiwan produces 90% of the world's advanced chips. In any serious conflict scenario, those fabs go dark. TSMC has a contingency plan, sometimes called the Silicon Shield strategy, that involves destroying key equipment rather than letting it fall into Chinese hands. So the best-case scenario for the global economy isn't China capturing TSMC, it's TSMC being destroyed. That's the optimistic version. Without advanced chip production, global electronics manufacturing halts within months, not years, months. No new smartphones for 2 to 3 years minimum. That's how long it would take to rebuild equivalent capacity elsewhere, and that's being optimistic. No new cars. Modern vehicles have hundreds of chips. Auto plants would shut down within weeks of existing chip stocks running out. Hospitals would face critical shortages of medical equipment that relies on advanced processors, ventilators, MRI machines, drug dispensing systems. The economic damage from a Taiwan conflict has been estimated at $2 to $3 trillion in the first year alone. Some models put it higher, much higher. For context, the 2008 global financial crisis, which felt like the world was ending, caused roughly $2 trillion in losses over multiple years. A Taiwan conflict could do that damage in months to every economy on Earth simultaneously, with no recovery mechanism in sight. Now let's talk about the nuclear question, because we have to, even though nobody wants to. China has nuclear weapons, approximately 500 warheads as of 2024, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, growing fast. The United States has approximately 5,500 nuclear warheads, more than enough to end human civilization several times over. Both countries have official no first use policies, meaning they claim they won't use nuclear weapons unless the other side uses them first. Here's why that policy may not hold in a Taiwan scenario. If China is losing a conventional war over Taiwan, losing badly, with its military being humiliated on the world stage, the pressure on Xi Jinping to escalate would be immense. Losing Taiwan conventionally might end his political career or his life. History shows that leaders facing existential political defeat make irrational decisions. That's not speculation, that's just history. A cornered nuclear power is the most dangerous thing in geopolitics, and both sides in a Taiwan conflict could end up cornered simultaneously. I'm not saying nuclear war is likely. Most analysts consider it unlikely. But unlikely and impossible are very different words when we're talking about thermonuclear weapons. The fact that serious people, serious, sober, credentialed people, consider nuclear escalation a non-zero possibility in a Taiwan conflict tells you everything about the stakes. Let's bring this back to the human level for a moment, because it's easy to talk about GDP projections and carrier groups and lose sight of what war actually means. Taiwan has 23 million people. They have families, businesses, apartment buildings, night markets, universities, hospitals. Taipei is a city of 2.6 million people, denser than Los Angeles. An urban battlefield in Taipei would look like the worst moments of Mariupol, multiplied by 10. The civilians who would die in a Taiwan conflict aren't abstractions. They're people who have built one of Asia's most vibrant societies under the permanent shadow of Chinese missiles pointed at them. On the Chinese side, the soldiers who would die crossing the Taiwan Strait are mostly young men in their late teens and 20s. Conscripts who didn't choose this war, dying in water that military planners already know will be extraordinarily lethal. On the American side, if it comes to that, military families in Virginia, California, and Texas would get the knock on the door. War is always, ultimately, about the knock on the door. And in a Taiwan conflict, a lot of doors would get knocked on. So who actually wants this war? Because when you look closely, the answer is more complicated than you might expect. Does Xi Jinping want war? Probably not, in the sense that he would prefer Taiwan to surrender without a fight. What Xi wants is reunification. War is the instrument he's willing to use if necessary, not the goal itself. Does the U.S. military want war? Institutionally, no, but the U.S. defense industry, the one Eisenhower warned about, profits enormously from Taiwan tension. Every arms sale to Taiwan, every defense budget increase justified by the China threat, every new weapon system funded by the fear of conflict, that's profit. Enormous profit. Does Taiwan want war? Absolutely not. But Taiwan also won't surrender. Survey after survey shows Taiwanese people are willing to fight rather than accept forced reunification. Does the global economy want war? Obviously not. But the global economy has no vote in this decision. The terrifying reality is that nobody may actively want this war, and it could still happen. Through miscalculation, through accident, through a decision made at 3 a.m. that can't be unmade. The First World War wasn't wanted by most of the people who started it either. History doesn't require intent, it just requires a spark and enough dry wood. Let's talk about the timeline, because the window for conflict may be shorter than most people realize. Xi Jinping has publicly stated that Taiwan reunification cannot be delayed indefinitely. He's tied his legacy to it. China's military modernization has been specifically designed around a Taiwan invasion scenario. The PLA has been practicing amphibious assaults for 2 decades. Most U.S. military and intelligence analysts believe the window of peak Chinese military capability relative to Taiwan and U.S. forces in the region runs roughly from now until the early 2030s. After that, U.S. defense investments, Taiwan's own military buildup, and potential shifts in Chinese economic power may shift the balance. Xi Jinping is 71 years old. He has removed the term limits on his presidency. He appears to be thinking about legacy, what history will say about him. Mao unified China. Deng made it rich. What does Xi do? If you're Xi, the answer writes itself. This combination, a leader thinking about legacy, a military at peak readiness, and a closing window of advantage, is exactly the kind of pressure cooker that produces wars. The 2020s may be the decade that determines Taiwan's fate for a generation, and possibly the fate of the global order along with it. Now let's look at the arguments on both sides of the central question. Is defending Taiwan worth the cost? The case for defending Taiwan, and it's a serious case, made by serious people. First, if China takes Taiwan without consequence, every authoritarian government on earth draws the same lesson. Force works, democracy doesn't protect you, alliances are worthless. Second, U.S. credibility in Asia collapses instantly. Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, all U.S. treaty allies would have to fundamentally recalculate whether American security guarantees mean anything. Third, Chinese control of TSMC would give Beijing strategic leverage over the entire global technology supply chain. That's not dependence, that's domination. Fourth, the precedent of allowing military conquest of a democracy in the 21st century sends a message to every democracy that borders an authoritarian neighbor. Your freedom is negotiable. Fifth, the cost of deterrence. Maintaining enough military presence to make China think twice may be far lower than the cost of actually fighting or the cost of capitulation. These are not hawkish talking points. These are the considered conclusions of strategists who have spent careers thinking about nothing else. Now the case against, and it's equally serious, made by equally serious people. First, no vital American interest justifies risking nuclear war. Not chips, not geography, not even the principle of democratic self-determination. Second, the American people have never been asked whether they want to go to war with a nuclear-armed China over Taiwan. That conversation hasn't happened. It should. Third, Taiwan's strategic value could be hedged. Diversifying chip production, which the CHIPS Act is attempting, reduces the economic leverage of a Taiwan conflict over time. Fourth, the assumption that defending Taiwan deters China may be backwards. U.S. military commitment may actually make war more likely by convincing Taiwan it can afford to be provocative. Fifth, the United States has fought wars for credibility before. Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. Credibility is a seductive justification for wars that destroy the credibility they were supposed to protect. Sixth, a negotiated solution. Some form of guaranteed autonomy, some creative new status, may be painful, uncomfortable, and imperfect, but it keeps 23 million people alive. These aren't cowards' arguments. They're the arguments of people who have seen what wars actually cost and are not convinced the math works out. Here's what makes Taiwan different from every other geopolitical flashpoint in the world right now. The stakes are genuinely global. Ukraine matters enormously. The Middle East matters enormously, but a conflict in either place, as devastating as it is, doesn't threaten to take down the entire global economy simultaneously. Taiwan does, because of those chips, because of that geography, because of the nuclear dimension. A Taiwan conflict is the one scenario where virtually every country on Earth, whether it wants to or not, gets pulled into the consequences. There is nowhere to hide from a global chip shortage. There is nowhere to hide from the economic shockwave of a U.S.-China military confrontation. Every government on Earth has a stake in what happens in the Taiwan Strait. Most of them are pretending otherwise because thinking about it is too uncomfortable. Let's talk about what's actually being done, because the picture is more active than most people realize. Taiwan is spending more on defense than at any point in its history. Its 2024 defense budget hit a record $19 billion. It's buying drones, missiles, and anti-ship weapons at a frantic pace. The United States passed the CHIPS Act in 2022, committing $52 billion to rebuild domestic semiconductor manufacturing. TSMC is building fabs in Arizona. Intel is building in Ohio. But semiconductor fabs take 5 to 10 years to reach full production capacity. We are not close to reducing the Taiwan chip dependency. Not yet. Japan has dramatically increased its defense spending, breaking a decades-long taboo, explicitly citing the China-Taiwan threat as the reason. Australia, the UK, and the US formalized AUKUS, providing Australia with nuclear-powered submarines specifically designed to deter Chinese naval expansion. NATO has opened a liaison office in Japan. For the first time in its history, NATO is looking at the Pacific as a security concern. The pieces of a deterrence architecture are being assembled. Whether they're assembled fast enough, that's the question nobody can answer with confidence. Here's the scenario that terrifies planners most: not a deliberate invasion, but an accidental war. A Chinese military aircraft strays too close to a Taiwanese jet during a routine intercept. A collision. Both pilots eject. China's state media reports it as a Taiwanese attack. Taiwan's government reports it as Chinese aggression. Social media explodes on both sides within minutes. Xi faces domestic pressure to respond. Taiwan goes to high alert. The U.S. 7th Fleet moves toward the strait. Chinese naval vessels move to intercept. Nobody in this scenario chose war, but the machinery of escalation has started moving, and stopping it requires every decision-maker involved to be calm, rational, and well-informed simultaneously. In a crisis, at 3 a.m., with incomplete information and enormous domestic political pressure, that's a very high bar to clear. The Cuban Missile Crisis came within hours of nuclear war over a decision made by a Soviet submarine commander acting alone, without communication with Moscow. We survived 1962 partly because of luck. Luck is not a strategy, and the Taiwan Strait generates near-miss incidents with alarming regularity. So here's where I leave you. I promised you I wouldn't tell you what to think. I meant it. You've heard the case for why Taiwan matters: chips, geography, democracy, precedent, credibility. You've heard the case for why the cost might be too high: nuclear risk, democratic consent, alternative strategies, the graveyard of wars fought for credibility. You've heard what the war would actually look like: the blockade, the invasion, the economic collapse, the knock on the door. Taiwan is 36,000 square kilometers, the size of Maryland, and the question of whether it's worth World War III may be the defining question of our generation. What do you think?